Happy New Year. I hope everyone has had a happy and safe Christmas and holiday. Welcome to the Canadian Innovators, the show that celebrates innovation, entrepreneurs, and the Canadian spirit. I'm Jocelyn Bamford, and every week we introduce a new entrepreneur or expert on the economy to tell their stories and unpack the challenges of keeping jobs in Canada, as well as discussing potential solutions for job growth and prosperity. Today on the program, an expert in the economy, Dr. Jack Mintz is the President's Fellow of the School of Public Policy at the University of Calgary. He is currently chair of the Alberta Premier's Economic Recovery Council since March of 2020. He serves on the board of the Imperial Oil Limited and Alberta Health Services. He is a distinguished senior fellow of the Macdonald-Laurier Institute and senior fellow at the C.D. Howe Institute, and a research fellow at International Tax and Investment Center in Washington, D.C. He has been awarded the Order of Canada in 2015, as well as receiving the Queen's Elizabeth Diamond Jubilee Medal in 2012. He has been an economic professor in universities around Canada and the United States. Wow, Dr. Mintz, that is quite a list of accomplishments, and I haven't even got to most of them. Dr. Mintz, would you provide our viewers a little background on how you ended up in academia? We would love to know about your journey.
Well, actually, I started off in history as an undergraduate student at University of Alberta, and then that year I also took economics, and I ended up really enjoying economics a lot, maybe because it was mathematical, and I just kept on doing well in the course and wanted to continue. I ended up going to Queen's University to do my master's, and then after that, I still kept doing well. I ended up doing my PhD in England, and then from there, when it became an academic and teaching at Queen's University, and then later at University of Toronto, and then finally at the University of Calgary, where I started the School of Public Policy. But it just seemed to be where I wanted to go. But I also had a lot of other things I did during my career, which I've enjoyed quite a bit, including running a business tax reform commission under Honorable Paul Martin back in '96 and '97, and also having an opportunity to work with the World Bank and the IMF and the OECD on providing economic advice to many countries around the world, especially on tax policy.
Well, that is quite a list of accomplishments, Dr. Mintz. The theme of the show today is, what does 2022 hold for the Canadian economy? So why don't we start with your opening thoughts on what we're going to see in 2022?
Well, I think 2022 should be good. I mean, we're going to start off with a tough period with Omicron still going through the population. And it is going to cause some staff shortages. We're going to probably see some slowdowns this month. But as we come out of it, I think the Canadian economy will come back. We'll see more employment. We'll see more growth. And unfortunately, we'll also see more inflation during this period. So I do see 2022 being pretty good, especially for a resource-based economy like Canada, which is doing very well because of the tremendous demand for commodities these days, as we've seen.
So, Dr. Mintz, you told me that when we were speaking before the program that you were not a public health official and that you tend to shy away from weighing in on the COVID discussion. However, we're seeing one province after another roll back into lockdowns, and Ontario just this week announced another lockdown. This one, their own analysis showed that they were ineffective. So could you give us your view on the impact, specifically on the 92% of Canadians who work in small to medium-sized businesses?
Well, obviously, there's going to be certain sectors that are going to be hurt by more lockdowns or some closures. And that's going to be, of course, entertainment, where spreader events are being prevented. We're going to see retail sector may be to some degree affected by any constraints that are applying there. But we're also seeing that Omicron is leading to a number of people getting ill, and then you have to either isolate or you have to quarantine for a period. And then that's aggravating the labor shortages that we're seeing in many industries. So it's going to be kind of a tough road for certain parts of the of the business sector. On the other hand, other parts which don't get affected very much by the lockdown rules are still going to do quite well. So it's going to be a mix as we've had in the past 2 years.
We're back. I'm talking with esteemed economist Dr. Jack Mintz about the state of the Canadian economy. And let's jump right back into the subject that's hitting Canadians every day in the pocketbook, and that's inflation. What are you seeing, Dr. Mintz, and what can we do about it to curb it?
Well, first of all, I think people are going to be a bit surprised this coming quarter about inflation still rearing its head. In fact, when you hear from manufacturers and other businesses about planned price increases for January, I think there were a lot of things being held off before the end of the holidays that I think we're going to start seeing, some price increases that are going to come through quite rapidly over this coming short while. Now, how do we deal with it? Well, really, this is really up to government policy, but the two major ones is monetary policy. And as we've heard yesterday, the Federal Reserve in the United States may start raising interest rates sooner than expected in March. I suspect the Bank of Canada will be following along. And as interest rates and tighter monetary policy comes along, that will start slowing down the economy, and that will help, I think, control inflation. It's actually the number one tool. But the monetary policy could be helped by governments being careful not to run up big fiscal deficits. And I think that's a big issue because it's not clear that the governments are in that position yet, especially with the health problems still facing the Canadian economy and the various restrictions, that they may be afraid to start cutting back on some of their spending and things like that. But I think fiscal policy needs to start changing quite dramatically from where it was in 2020, where instead of governments doling out cash all the time, it's going to have to start pulling back and spending less and not growing so much their spending and their deficits as we've seen in the past year and a half.
Yeah, and we're certainly seeing it in manufacturing, a real challenge to get people back into work that were on assistance and preferring to take that. So we absolutely need to get the economy going. But Dr. Mintz, another thing that's hitting Canadian in the pocketbook is taxes, taxes, and more taxes. And I understand that you have some idea about tax reform, so we'd love to hear them.
Well, I think, first of all, I want to say that I think we should be growing out of our debt problems and deficits with good, sound policy that contributes to growth. And in fact, we should not be trying to raise taxes. Taxes are already at 40% of GDP, and I think there's no reason that we have to start raising it further than what we've had. In fact, it would be quite unusual to do that. And that means that if we are going to do any type of tax policy changes, it should be focused on growth. How do we get the economy going further? I think we need corporate tax reform. The corporate tax system is now getting to be a mess again. Too many special and targeted credits and incentives. The rates are no longer an advantage to Canada. We did have a rate advantage, but now it's all completely gone. It's now our corporate rate is really no different than the average of the weighted average of the OECD or United States, whatever you want to pick. It's just we have no more tax advantage on the corporate side, and that's showing up in our investment, how poor our investment is doing as a country. But I also think we need to deal with something with the personal tax side. And I think once we hit corporate personal and top rates going over 50%, I think that was an enormous mistake because that just encourages a lot of tax avoidance and potentially tax evasion, which is even worse because it's illegal tax evasion. And so I think that we need to start getting back to personal tax reform with the idea of trying to get rates down, broaden the tax base. There's a lot of incentives, some of them very beneficial to higher income households. So, why not try to attack those incentives and try to get a better personal tax system as well. And believe it or not, the GST needs reform. Our GST is actually a mediocre GST. We have so many exceptions to the system that we end up with a higher rate than we should have. In fact, instead of a 5% federal GST rate, we could have a 2 or 3% rate if we didn't have if we had something more like the New Zealand GST than what we have right now.
So talk a little bit about that we only have about 30 seconds left. How is that New Zealand GST different than our GST?
New Zealand doesn't have exemptions for anything like food, rental, housing, nothing. Everything is fully taxed. They do have a low-income tax credit to help low-income people so that they can bear the tax more easily. But it's a really much better structured tax. In fact, it's the poster child of the world in terms of how to have a really good VAT.
So I'm going to stop you there. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back at Canadian Innovators and hear more from Jack Mintz. Dr. Mintz, you are the chair of the Alberta Premier's Economic Recovery Council. Could you please tell us about your work and what you're trying to achieve?
Well, we meet periodically with Premier. In fact, it was almost weekly back March 2020 when the pandemic started. And we're basically a sounding board for him. And specifically, we weren't dealing with public health issues. That was really not the expertise of the council. It was more on the suggestions for an economic recovery plan. And in fact, in June of that year, the Alberta government put out, before any other government in Canada, a real economic recovery plan. And in fact, that is the basis for what's happening right now in Alberta, which is very good news for the province because there's been a lot of good things happening on the economic side. And I think it's because the Alberta government has been pursuing policies that is really welcoming businesses to come to Alberta and to set up there. And so there's diversification happening, as well as a good help from higher oil prices, which no doubt has helped spur the economy again.
And certainly we need an economic recovery instead of a lockdown plan. So I applaud that efforts. So Dr. Mintz, if you could rate the Premier in terms of economic policy, who are the standouts and who needs some work?
Well, I haven't really thought through grading them. I think one would have to really spend a lot of time going through the various policies. I do give credit to Alberta in terms of its economic plan. It has strategic sectors. It's been getting a lot of new investments in all sorts of different areas besides oil and gas. In fact, oil and gas hasn't come back in the same way that some new things that started in Alberta. Alberta now has the lowest corporate income tax rate in Canada and one of the lowest in North America. That is very positive development for many non-oil and gas industries that want to come to Alberta. And they also have Invest Alberta that's been a really very good kind of shop to attract new businesses coming to Alberta. And they're also deregulating. A number of the provinces are also doing some deregulation. But if I gave my tip a hat off to a couple of them, it would actually be in the Atlantic. I think Premier Higgs in New Brunswick has done a very good job, first of all, dealing with the health pandemic, but also he's had some kind of smart policies in New Brunswick that is helping the economy a bit. And I think one of them, is the way that he handled the carbon tax, where he actually lowered the fuel excise tax and brought in the carbon tax. And I think that was a very smart play on his part. And the other one is the new Premier of Nova Scotia, Tim Houston, who has really put healthcare front and center in the election campaign and has made that his major focal point, I think, for the province. And I think that's been well-timed, and I think it was the right sort of thing to do. And he also certainly has some plans to try to build up business investment in Nova Scotia. We'll see how they do. It's new and early for him, but certainly he's shown some fairly innovative policies at this point.
Now, would you care to share who you think needs to up their game?
Well, I think Ontario needs to up its game for sure. It's got a massive economy for Canada. It's 40% of Canada. We really rely on Ontario doing very well, and I think that Ontario's shutdowns have been too long and too frequent. I look at school cutbacks, for example. I think that's been something which has been far more done in Ontario than I see compared to Alberta, for example. My brother's grandchildren, they were in school almost all the time last year, except for a short period. Well, my grandchildren in Toronto have had only a few months of schooling, in-person schooling last year.
Yeah, we need to get the kids back to school, absolutely. So we just got about a minute left, and I'd really like to find out what grade you would give the federal government in terms of economic policy.
Well, I think the federal government, they did the right thing in 2020 to make sure the economy didn't go into a disastrous situation. But in my view, they spent way too much money. I mean, who ever heard of an economy where households actually have more income, 10% more income during a recession? I mean, and that did not happen in Europe. And that was because it was just overspending by the federal government. So I think on the economic side, I think the federal government is now in a position where it's got to really change course.
So we're going to get right back after this break. Welcome back. I'm Jocelyn Bamford, and I'm here with economist Dr. Jack Mintz. Dr. Mintz, my favorite part of my program is when I talk to my guests and I ask them, if you were the prime minister or one of the premiers, what policies you would put in to help grow and maintain businesses in Canada. So I'm going to put you on the hot seat, and I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I think there are two things. Number one, as I mentioned earlier, I would do a major corporate tax reform. In fact, look at maybe completely taking another approach. In fact, I'll have a paper out on that soon. But I think the second thing is deregulation. I mean, it's hard to get things built in this country. And it's well known. Try to get a condo built in Toronto, try to get a windmill put in, whatever infrastructure we're talking about, we have to do far better than we're doing right now. And I think that's going to be a real challenge. And I think the governments need to start paying a lot more attention to getting both public and private investment capital going in this country.
Absolutely. And manufacturing is a cornerstone and one of our largest GDP contributors in Canada. What's your prediction for manufacturing in 2022?
Well, I'm hoping manufacturing will do better than what we've seen. I'm very concerned about the lack of investment in manufacturing. And in fact, it hasn't really had the kind of recovery that we need to have. We need to have new technologies being adopted. We have the need for new innovation to take place. I think many entrepreneurs are willing to do that. But what I am worried is about the amount of capital that's leaving Canada rather than coming into Canada. So Canadians are being entrepreneurial and they are getting things done, but they're doing it in other countries. And I think we better start worrying a little bit more about trying to attract much more capital investment coming into Canada, whether it's foreign direct investment or just Canadians keeping money at home and investing in production that would actually create a lot of jobs for Canadians.
Yeah, and we're in the manufacturing sector. We're definitely seeing businesses that could grow here for all of the reasons that you talked about, deciding that they're going to open up another plant in the United States or somewhere where they have less onerous regulations in other jurisdictions. Now, you touched upon direct foreign investment fleeing Canada, and we're seeing a ton of that, whether it's personal investments or corporate investments. What are your thoughts on this, and how can we turn the tide?
Well, I think we just need governments to say that they are going to go try to build business. I mean, what we've had even before the pandemic, we already had a very poor investment record. And even if you take away oil and gas, as we talked about earlier, it was not that great in manufacturing, retail trade. In fact, the only one that was really going well was professional services and warehousing, for Amazon. But generally, we could do far better than what we're doing across all the sectors. And that we need business-friendly policies by governments that put an emphasis on trying to attract private investment. And that actually has been missing from the federal economic agenda to a large degree.
So give me two things that you would do to attract investment in Canada. You talked little bit about making it easier to build, not having the regulation. Is there anything else that you would do to attract more foreign investment here?
Well, I think, part of it is on the regulatory side, I would do a number of the provinces are doing, and I think it should be done at the federal level, which is say, all right, let's go through all our regulations, get rid of the poor ones, and let's say that every time we're going to introduce a new regulation, we're going to get rid of one or two other ones. It's not necessarily the best science that I've ever seen in terms of deregulation, but it does put some onus on governments to really try to deregulate, and it has been successful in a number of jurisdictions that have actually put emphasis in that way. And then on the tax side, I think we really need to bring down our personal income tax rates and undertake corporate tax reform that I think would really spur investment.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much, Dr. Mintz. I appreciated having you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
The Canadian economy is headed for troubled waters, fueled by poor government policy. In Ontario, the seeming unended cycle of lockdowns without any new solutions in coping with the surge is causing further destruction of the economy, particularly in small and medium-sized business. We need bold, out-of-the-box thinking to right our economic ship. I'm Jocelyn Bamford. Thank you for watching Canadian Innovators. And if you're an innovator, tell us your story. Write to us at CanadianInnovators@thenewsforum.com, and you might find yourself right here on the show. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.